Now, to start the show, we have my good friend, the Reverend Bernard Randall, joining us for, I think, probably the 10th time. Bernard, thank you for coming on. It's good to see you. God bless you. And how are you?
My pleasure. Yeah, I'm well. I'm sure it's not quite that many times, but
You
talk
are
so
a
many
regular at
times.
this point, though.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
Not at all. Now, viewers may be aware of your case, your personal case, in which you were essentially sacked from a school as a school chaplain for giving a sermon or assembly, some kind of speech on being free to decide for oneself what one believes, whether one wants to take on board trans ideology or Christian ideology, being able to make your own mind up. You got sacked for this. You've been in and out on this with appeals. It seems, how many years has it been now?
It's over 5 years now since I
Oh my
gave the sermon.
goodness.
So there's a sermon in the school chapel saying, "Make up your own mind on LGBT matters, but you may believe traditional Christian teachings if you want." And that was deemed so excessive, I was reported to the police under the government's anti-terrorism duty and reported to safeguarding authorities, which is quite absurd. Quite absurd.
It's very absurd. You were one of the first to get cancelled for this, and it seems you have still been cancelled. We'll get to where you are at the moment later. But I want to talk because you've been working on this case, or you've been very involved in this case, and I think it will affect your case of Kristie Higgs. Now, for people who don't know, Kristie is on trial as we speak. As you and I have this conversation, she is in the courts fighting for free speech in the United Kingdom. Can you give us a bit of a background on who Kristie Higgs is and what her case is all about, please?
Yeah, sure. So Christy was a sort of teaching pastoral assistant in a school. So she had particular responsibility for dealing with kids who'd been excluded from the classroom and sort of put in isolation where they sort of do their own work quietly, hopefully calm down before they can go back into normal mainstream lessons. Um, and she'd worked in the school for a number of years with no complaint at all. But then the school, as in many schools in the United Kingdom and I know in the United States as well, had introduced or was looking at some quite extremely pro LGBTQIA plus whatever the list is materials. And she was concerned about this as a Christian because it goes against many aspects of Christian teaching on family life and so on. So she had posted on Facebook to only to her friends, so it wasn't a public post in the full sense. But she posted a couple of links, reposted some things talking about the sort of the queer theory approach to sex and relationships education that was being introduced, using some relatively strong language. Talked about brainwashing our children and so on. And she had said, this is important stuff. Please read this. That the language about brainwashing was not her own. Um, Someone on her Facebook friends reported it to the school, who sacked her basically for gross misconduct. Um, and the basis of that was not that they didn't think that that the problem was with her, but they sacked her because they said external viewers might think that the school employed someone who was homophobic and transphobic. The school didn't say she was homophobic at all. They accepted that she wasn't, but it was because the sort of the third party might think that. So they sacked her, and hence legal cases in the employment tribunal went up to appeal because she lost there. The appeals tribunal um, gave her a partial victory, but only partial. And so it's now reached the next highest court, the second highest court in the land, the Court of Appeal, which is hearing was yesterday and today, as you say, going on as we speak, looking at whether she should have completely won her appeal or legal technicalities and so on. But she's been dragged through this for 5 years for Facebook reposts, not so much her own words, but giving this impression to people on the outside that she might hold strong views. Well, free speech means the expression of strong views, I would have thought, but that's what's being tested in the Court of Appeal as we speak.
I'm so sick and tired of these cases where someone says someone may be offended, in the eventual cause of someone might take issue with, like, no one's actually been offended. Therefore, what is the problem? And of course, when people are passionate, as this woman clearly is, about her faith and about things that go against her faith, of course, when someone is passionate, they use strong language. Not, I don't mean cursing, but when you're writing passionately, it comes across as strong to people who aren't as passionate. And so it strikes me that she's not actually done anything wrong, not offended anyone, but someone has assumed that someone may be offended and see her and or the school as homophobic or transphobic or something, which isn't actually the case. And it's increasingly common that people are persecuted these days for retweeting and or resharing on Facebook rather than posting original content. It's bizarre, this guilt by association. But anyway, so she lost the first employment tribunal. Then she's gone to appeal. It's the appeals court today. What do we expect the outcome to be?
It's really hard to gauge. I was in court with her yesterday as an observer because it affects my case as well. I've been watching online today, and you try to gauge from the kind of questions the panel of judges are asking which way they're leaning. I think some of their questions lean towards being supportive of Kristie. Some of them a bit more ambiguous, but I think they are being very careful about the idea that free speech in English law, in British law, does allow you to say things which are offensive and might disturb people.
Right.
But there is a line which is very ambiguous, beyond which you shouldn't go, where it is so gratuitously offensive that you shouldn't say those things. My sense is that the judges are thinking that what Kristie said was not just gratuitously offensive. It was expressed strongly. The language was hyperbolic, you might say, really putting it in its most extreme form. But it wasn't gratuitously offensive because it was contributing to political debate about to what extent does gender identity get recognised in our schools and taught and whatever. So my sense is, and of course, I'm not in the minds of the judges, my sense is that it's going quite well, but you never quite know until they sit down and write out their judgment what they'll come out with. It is very hard to say.
So I have seen Kristie posting videos of some of the books that were in her school library, and I would take issue with them. There's lots of queer theory, lots of gender theory. It's just inappropriate for young children. I disagree with men dressing up as women, for example, and I wouldn't be teaching boys that they should be wearing dresses and things like that. And up until 5 years ago, I believe that most people would have accepted that was just common sense. And in the last 5 to 10 years, it's been accelerated that boys can be girls, men can become women, vice versa. But why should everyone have to accept that new ideology? Otherwise, they're cancelled and sacked. And yourself and Kristie have both lost your jobs over a similar issue. Why should we have to change our moral compass?
Well, indeed, why should we? When, as you say, up until 5 minutes ago, really, in historical terms, pretty much everybody would agree with what I said in my disputed sermon. The things that Kristie Higgs was saying, certainly the underlying ideas that Kristie was putting out there was that it should not be the case that we push lots of stuff about gender ideology and drag queen story hour, that kind of thing that gets pushed into primary schools. Very young children are simply confused by this, and that's not healthy for the children. That shouldn't be particularly controversial to say. And if saying that is not controversial, then saying it in strong terms shouldn't be so terribly controversial either. And this is what the case that she's going through, and to some extent my case, hinges on, is this question of whether third parties, the sort of heckler's veto, people on the outside who shout loudly, are allowed to say, well, you mustn't say these things because we don't like them, or whether actually in a free society people are allowed to shout quite strongly from both sides and neither side should be penalized for it. And that's the test. I'm not sure I would go as 100% as far as you do in what you've just said and what you object to. I'm perhaps a bit more relaxed, but I want you to be able to say what you can say, just as I want the people who say that you can be born in the wrong body. I want them to be able to say that so that I can argue against them and say, no, that's complete nonsense. That really cannot be true in any meaningful sense, regardless of religious views. It's just nonsense. So it's allowing both sides to shout is important. And if the shouting is sometimes, colourful language or putting things in extreme hyperbolic ways, I think that's okay and it should be okay, as long as you're not actually sort of inciting violence or pointing at an individual and saying you are the most wicked person who's ever lived and you should suffer the consequences. That, yeah, making it personal, I think, probably goes beyond the pale. But broad debate should be allowed to be in wide terms. That's my case.
And that's what it is about. It is about broad debate. It's not actually about how strong or offensive or hyperbolic her language is. I'm very interested in seeing both of your cases together for this reason. So when I speak, I tend to be more hyperbolic, and people would see my language as more extreme than, for example, yours, which is more moderate. But we both get treated the same way. Is the issue? Is Kristie Higgs and yourself have both been sacked for addressing the same problem, but from very, very different perspectives. And that she puts it out there that this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening, and you were just saying, well, you can either have this or that. You can make your own mind up. It's like it doesn't actually matter. They'll tell you it's about your tone. They'll tell you about that they're policing the language or the tone, but actually it's the debate they don't want to be had. And so I'm hoping that the court comes down in favor of Kristie and of yourself and says, actually, we can have conversation. We cannot let the hostile mob, the vocal minority, close down conversations they don't want to hear.